Paris had waited for spectacle. The arrival of the Duchess was meant to be a thunderclap in the City of Light, a moment of fashion rebirth, of image restoration, of global attention. Yet what followed was silence. When the cameras flashed inside the Balenciaga show, the scene that unfolded was not one of adoration, but of unease. Meghan Markle, dressed in sleek black and confident posture, entered a room that should have erupted in applause. Instead, the atmosphere turned brittle, as if the air itself withdrew. It was not hostility that filled the space, but a cold absence, an unspoken hesitation that hung between the flashbulbs. In the world of high fashion, where noise equates to status, silence speaks of doubt. Observers noted that something felt off from the moment she arrived. Editors who usually jostled for selfies stayed seated. Designers normally eager to be photographed beside a royal kept their gazes politely distant. Even the paparazzi, those experts in spectacle, seemed to shoot without interest. Every camera angle captured beauty, but no warmth. Every frame spoke of effort, but not ease. In that room of velvet and perfume, Paris had quietly delivered its verdict: curiosity without invitation. What had gone wrong? Some insiders whispered about missteps before the show even began. The brand she aligned with, Balenciaga, was still emerging from controversy over a campaign that had crossed moral lines. For an event obsessed with image association, mattered more than attire. Critics called it tone-deaf, a humanitarian figure attending a house accused of exploiting childlike imagery. The contradiction stung. A duchess who preached compassion, posing beneath a banner of scandal, created an echo that Paris could not ignore. Then came the smaller whispers, cruel but potent, the kind of gossip that spreads faster than applause. Backstage stylists murmured that her team had struggled to control details. Perfume that lingered too long, clothes borrowed instead of bespoke, labels still attached like silent reminders that this was not couture granted, but couture on loan. In Paris, such details were everything. Fashion was not only about fabric, but about belonging, and the unspoken message was clear. Meghan was no longer inside the circle. The brands that once courted her aura now kept a measured distance. The optics became their own narrative. Footage circulated of her walking alone through a crowded corridor, photographers clicking without frenzy. The clips went viral, not because of admiration, but because of awkwardness. How could a woman who once dominated headlines now command such restraint? Was this exhaustion with overexposure? Or was it something deeper, a collective decision to turn the page? Paris seemed to answer without words. In cinematic contrast, the lights of the runway reflected in her expression, composed yet strained. Paris loves confidence but despises desperation, and the line between the two can vanish in a flash. The silence around her was not just an absence of applause, it was the presence of judgment. For an audience that measures authenticity like couture, the Duchess's performance felt rehearsed. Every gesture was perfect, yet nothing seemed spontaneous. When the evening ended, the chatter moved from the runway to the cafes. Journalists debated whether this was merely an off night or a public reckoning. For years, Meghan had been both idol and lightning rod, her image crafted with surgical precision. But here, amid the city that defines taste, she appeared stripped of that control. It was as if Paris itself rejected the script. In every era, Paris crowns icons and dismantles pretenders. It did so to stars before her, celebrities, who arrived expecting coronation and left with reflection. The Duchess's Paris debut had been intended as a triumphant return to European elegance. Instead, it became a quiet, cautionary tale. Fame cannot be restyled when credibility unravels. Perhaps the most haunting question lingered in the air long after the lights dimmed, when silence replaces applause. What message does the City of Light truly send? Was Paris rejecting the woman or the myth she carried? As dawn spread across Paris, another story began to circulate, one far removed from fabric and fashion. It was whispered first by drivers and then amplified online. Meghan Markle, after leaving the Balenciaga show, had reportedly driven through the Pont tunnel, the very passage where Princess Diana's life ended in 1997. For most visitors, such a route would mean nothing. But for Paris and for the millions who still mourn Diana, that tunnel remains sacred ground. When news of the drive reached social media, the silence of the fashion show transformed into a storm of speculation. What appeared at first to be coincidence quickly became controversy. Some said it was an innocent route back to her hotel. Others insisted it was deliberate, a calculated nod to Diana's tragic final moments. In an era of instant outrage, speculation needs no proof. Within hours, TikTok clips appeared showing car headlights gliding through the same tunnel intercut with haunting footage of the 1997 crash. The captions were merciless coincidence or imitation. This was no longer about fashion. It was about legacy and symbolism. The Duchess of Sussex had long been compared to the late Princess of Wales, both women defined by their uneasy relationship with the monarchy and the media. Yet to many, this act felt like crossing a line. Was this homage or something darker, a performance built on pain? French tabloids responded with indignation. The Pont de l'Alma, they argued, is not a backdrop for celebrity reinvention. It is a site of tragedy, one that still evokes deep national sorrow. British outlets echoed the discomfort. Commentators recalled Meghan's previous statements about Diana's influence, how she studied the princess's interviews, admired her humanitarian image, and even drew inspiration from her wardrobe choices. To them, this tunnel drive appeared less like an accident and more like deliberate symbolism. The online divide was immediate. Admirers defended her, arguing that critics were reading too much into geography. But detractors called it morbid theater, a provocation meant to manipulate emotion. Has modern celebrity blurred the line between tribute and exploitation? In a world that rewards attention above all else, can symbolism ever be innocent? Observers noted another layer to the story, the emotional contrast between Diana and Meghan. Diana's image in Paris is one of sincerity, a princess hounded by cameras, trapped by duty, and finally undone by the same media she tried to escape. Meghan, by contrast, has often sought those same flashbulbs, using them to construct a narrative of resilience and reinvention. The tunnel story magnified this difference with painful clarity. Diana fled the cameras, Meghan chased them. The global media, sensing the cultural weight, seized the moment. Talk shows replayed the footage, analysts debated motives, and hashtags like Nar Diana 2.0 trended for days. Some viewers found the parallel eerie, almost prophetic. Others found it distasteful. In Paris, commentators on morning television called it a ghost revisited. Even seasoned journalists admitted that the optics were hard to defend. Behind the glamour, there was unease. Those close to the fashion world claimed that Meghan's team tried to downplay the incident, insisting she had been unaware of the tunnel's location. Yet few believed that narrative. After all, this was a woman who built a global brand on royal memory. To claim ignorance of one of the most infamous landmarks in modern royal history strained credibility. The controversy deepened when international outlets began revisiting her past statements about Diana. Old interviews resurfaced moments where Meghan spoke of understanding what Diana endured, of feeling the echo of history. Now those same words seemed to take on unsettling new meaning. Analysts began asking whether the Duchess's admiration had evolved into obsession. Could it be that the image she sought to recreate had become a mirror too powerful to escape? Cultural critics warned that the spectacle had consequences beyond one viral story. It risked transforming tragedy into aesthetic. Paris, the city that immortalized Diana in sorrow, had now witnessed a strange echo, a royal descendant reenacting a ghostly route beneath the same bridge. To many, it felt like history exploited, not honored. By the week's end, the damage was done. What began as a fashion appearance had turned into a global debate about taste trauma and the ethics of fame. Paris, which had once greeted her with silence, now buzzed with scandal. The Duchess's carefully curated image as a humanitarian and reformer was colliding with a narrative of vanity and manipulation. As news cycles moved from runways to retrospection, one question lingered in every broadcast and headline: how far can a public figure go in pursuing symbolism before it becomes self-parody? For Meghan Markle, the Tunnel of Paris had become more than a road. It had become a mirror, one reflecting the danger of trying to resurrect a legacy that was never hers to claim. As the outrage over the Paris tunnel swelled, another contradiction began to resurface, one that reached beyond symbolism and straight into the heart of credibility. For years, Meghan Markle had positioned herself as the survivor of media cruelty, the woman hounded by tabloids and the modern echo of Diana's suffering. She had declared, again and again, that the press destroyed her privacy and distorted her story. Yet Paris, with its endless reflections, forced a fresh look at that narrative. Because buried beneath the glamour and grievances was an uncomfortable truth. The very media empire she claimed to despise had become the foundation of her fame. Observers were quick to point out one glaring example. When Harry and Meghan decided to tell their story, they did not choose an independent platform or a neutral outlet. They chose CBS, the same American network that decades earlier had aired and re-aired the final footage of Princess Diana's last hours. It was CBS that turned her tragedy into ratings gold. For those who remembered the late 1990s, this connection was chilling. How could the Duchess, who invoked Diana's pain as a warning, now collaborate with the same institution that had profited from it? Commentators across the Atlantic pounced on the irony. British journalists reminded audiences that Meghan's most emotional interview moments, the tears, the revelations, the claims of royal mistreatment, were broadcast by the same cameras that once capitalized on Diana's demise. Was this redemption or repetition? To the media analysts who dissected the move, it looked less like moral conviction and more like strategic branding. Authentic suffering turned into marketable spectacle. In Hollywood, whispers spread through PR circles. Authenticity sells hypocrisy, kills, one analyst told Variety, and those words became a refrain across social platforms. The Oprah Winfrey interview, the Netflix docuseries, the endless public statements all seemed part of an empire built on contradiction. How does one condemn the cameras while demanding their attention? How can a public figure preach about privacy while monetizing confession? This tension between message and method had long shadowed the Sussex narrative, but Paris magnified it. Here, in a city that rewards subtlety and despises pretense, the dissonance was impossible to disguise. Meghan's efforts to control her image were being outpaced by the very forces she tried to manipulate. Every flashbulb captured not glamour, but inconsistency. The pattern extended beyond media alliances. Former staffers, quoted anonymously, described how Meghan's public statements were often ghost-written, her advocacy speeches recycled from existing scripts, her personal blog posts drafted by consultants. Insiders suggested that her humanitarian messaging, once inspiring, had grown mechanical. A leader without direction, one headline summarized. Authenticity. The currency of modern celebrity was slipping through her hands. Paris became the stage where all of these contradictions converged. The humanitarian Duchess, promoting compassion, was seated front row for a brand still accused of moral blindness. The woman who mourned the media's cruelty had chosen to align with its most ruthless players. The supposed champion of women's empowerment was now the subject of memes mocking her desperation for relevance. The collapse of credibility rarely happens overnight. It begins with small inconsistencies, the selective truth, the curated confession, and ends when the audience sees through the performance. In Paris, the audience did. What had once been framed as bravery now looked like calculation. What had once been seen as rebellion against royal hierarchy now resembled the creation of a new monarchy, one of branding, optics, and profit. Social media, the mirror of modern celebrity, amplified the shift. Threads comparing CBS's old footage of Diana to Meghan's Oprah interview went viral. Screenshots juxtaposed sensational 1997 headlines with 2021 soundbites. She blames tabloids for Diana's death. One post read, "Then partners with the network that aired it." Tens of thousands of users shared it. The digital echo was deafening. This was not merely public backlash, it was the erosion of moral authority. Every influencer, every activist, every Hollywood insider knew that public trust is fragile. The Duchess's power had never been built on royalty alone. It relied on perceived integrity. And once that faltered, every project, every partnership, every speech began to look transactional. For Paris, a city that treats reputation as currency, the optics were decisive. Meghan's credibility had not just been questioned, it had been audited publicly and mercilessly. The humanitarian image seemed less like conviction and more like choreography. The CBS collaboration symbolized not transparency, but complicity. The result was a cinematic irony worthy of the city itself. The Duchess, who once warned that history was repeating itself, now found her own story echoing Diana's not in tragedy, but in contradiction. Because history, when rewritten for profit, has a way of turning on its author. As the headlines faded and the runway lights dimmed, a single question lingered among critics and supporters alike. Was this the moment the narrative finally broke? Paris had stripped away the glamour, leaving behind a reflection that no publicist could retouch. For Meghan Markle, the true scandal was not the tunnel, nor the silence, it was the mirror that refused to flatter. Paris had always been a place where reputations were either reborn or quietly buried. For Meghan Markle, the city's verdict was unflinching. By the third day of Fashion Week, whispers had hardened into consensus. The Duchess, once a global fascination, had become a social liability. Designers who had courted her presence in the past now seemed intent on distance. In a world built on image and perception, such avoidance spoke volumes. Observers noted that even the choreography of celebrity had shifted around her. At the Balenciaga show, seats once reserved for power pairings were carefully reassigned. Photographers captured a striking tableau, Meghan poised yet isolated, sitting among influencers but far from the titans of couture. Where others were greeted with air kisses and handshakes, her reception was cool, almost bureaucratic. To fashion insiders, this was the ultimate signal, the quiet removal of someone from the inner sanctum of influence. Images circulated online within hours. They showed the Duchess standing alone in a marble foyer, cameras flashing, but no one at her side. The contrast was cruel. Nearby, Rihanna laughed with designers. Zendaya embraced Valentino's creative director, and Kim Kardashian posed beside the Balenciaga team. The internet noticed. Hashtags like borrowed couture and empty chair energy trended across platforms. The message was unspoken, yet unmistakable. Meghan had not been invited to belong. In the rarefied ecosystem of fashion, inclusion is currency. To be photographed beside icons is to be validated. To be ignored is to vanish. Paris had decided she was the latter. Editors whispered that her outfit's unaltered samples, not custom-made gowns, revealed more than any statement could. Borrowed, not bestowed, wrote one French columnist, a phrase that cut sharper than any review. It meant she was tolerated, not celebrated. This subtle exclusion carried deeper meaning. In the same city where she sought to channel Diana's elegance, she now faced the industry's cold shoulder. The aura that once surrounded the Sussex name had dimmed. Paris, with its ruthless sensitivity to authenticity, seemed to detect artifice beneath the glamour. The Duchess's composure, polished to perfection, read as performance. The city responded with silence. Online, the fallout turned viral. TikTok edits contrasted Meghan's solitary figure with archival footage of Diana glowing amid crowds who adored her. One was loved for truth, read a caption, the other for illusion. Millions watched, commented, and reshared. The visual juxtaposition was brutal but effective. The narrative was shifting from victim to opportunist, from admired to isolated. Even within Hollywood, murmurs began. Industry publications hinted that the fashion world's rejection could have ripple effects across entertainment. If luxury houses no longer saw her as a safe investment, would studios or streaming platforms follow? A media consultant quoted in The Wrap predicted that when fashion closes its doors, credibility across industries begins to evaporate. In a celebrity economy powered by cultural relevance, silence from Paris could prove more damaging than any tabloid headline. The irony deepened when Meghan's past statements resurfaced, those about authenticity, kindness, and empowerment. The images from Paris now contradicted every word. The Duchess, who once accused the monarchy of exclusion, was now the one excluded. The activist who spoke of transparency was now accused of manipulation. Paris had not humiliated her openly. It had done something far worse. It had ignored her. The symbolism did not go unnoticed. Critics compared her plight to that of historical figures who mistook media fascination for respect. Fame, after all, is a reflection, not a foundation. Once the reflection fades, what remains? The city that had once crowned Coco Chanel and Audrey Hepburn now held up a mirror to a modern Duchess and found the performance lacking. Even those who sympathized with her past struggles began to hesitate. The tone of coverage softened from outrage to fatigue. Perhaps the world has simply moved on, mused a BBC commentator. The statement echoed a broader truth that public fascination is finite, especially when authenticity is in question. For the first time in years, Meghan Markle faced a form of rejection that no PR campaign could spin indifference. In the grand theater of celebrity, scandal can be managed, criticism can be deflected, but silence is fatal. Paris, with its centuries of defining beauty and taste, had rendered its verdict through absence. The question now lingered across social feeds and talk shows alike. Was this a temporary backlash or the beginning of permanent exile from cultural relevance? The City of Light had extinguished its spotlight, leaving the Duchess in shadow. What remained was not hatred, but disinterest. And for a brand built on attention, that was the most devastating blow of all. By the time the last flashes of Fashion Week faded, the tone of the global conversation had shifted entirely. What began as curiosity about Meghan Markle's Paris appearance had transformed into a digital reckoning. Across newsrooms, comment sections, and social feeds, her once carefully managed image was now framed through ridicule. The Duchess, who once symbolized resilience, had become a study in overexposure. Memes replaced admiration, and silence became the soundtrack of her downfall. The first wave of backlash came not from the press, but from the audience she had once commanded. On Instagram, montages of her walking through the Balenciaga venue circulated with captions like, "Paris gave her the quiet she feared most." On TikTok, edits paired her solitary moments with ironic soundtracks, upbeat pop, layered over muted applause. The digital world, once her amplifier, had turned into her judge. The same algorithms that had once elevated her humanitarian image now weaponized irony against her. Fashion insiders, meanwhile, were quick to sense the shift in power dynamics. Invitations that might once have guaranteed glamour were suddenly viewed as risk. One stylist admitted to Page Six that major labels were playing safe. "Nobody wants to be the one to take that risk," the source said. Behind the scenes, brand strategists whispered about the Paris effect, the phenomenon of sudden reputational cooling that can make even global figures radioactive overnight. Even in Hollywood, this cooling was being felt. Reports circulated that production houses were hesitant to pitch projects centered around the Duchess's brand. Executives privately questioned whether she still carried the influence she once wielded. After Spotify had pulled back and Netflix reportedly scaled down future collaborations, her future as a media powerhouse seemed uncertain. Paris, in one devastating week, had shifted her from elite to expendable. Observers noted a cruel symmetry in her trajectory. Meghan had once criticized the royal institution for trapping her within rigid structures, claiming she sought freedom to tell her story on her terms. Yet now, she found herself confined again, this time by her own narrative. The very media machine she harnessed to redefine herself was now turning against her, transforming every appearance into performance art, every silence into commentary. Public sympathy, too, began to erode. In the weeks that followed, fan pages once dedicated to defending her began posting with hesitation. Comments grew sharper, dissecting inconsistencies in her interviews, fashion choices, and partnerships. One viral thread summarized the sentiment succinctly: "She came for redemption and left with reminders." The quote spread across platforms, capturing the essence of the Paris fallout: that the city had not destroyed her reputation, merely revealed its fragility. Paris, a city built on spectacle, has always been merciless toward imitation. It rewards originality but punishes performance. Critics compared Meghan's public presence to a reflection trying to imitate its source. "Diana moved people because she was vulnerable," one French columnist wrote. "Meghan performs vulnerability as costume." The comment, though harsh, resonated with audiences exhausted by contradiction. Within media analysis circles, the event was studied as a textbook case of cultural overreach. The attempt to merge activism, celebrity, and royalty into one seamless identity had proven unsustainable. A commentator on The Atlantic described it as the peril of branding morality. The public, once willing to suspend disbelief, now demanded authenticity that no amount of PR could manufacture. The memes that followed turned this critique into visual shorthand. Screenshots of Meghan sitting alone at the Balenciaga show were captioned with sardonic lines like "seats available" and "return by Monday." Others overlaid her images with quotes from her own interviews about loneliness and resilience. The result was an online narrative that collapsed her persona into paradox: a woman claiming empowerment while being defined by rejection. Even more striking was the reaction from younger audiences. The generation raised on digital transparency found her approach outdated, too scripted, too curated. Where once her speeches about self-acceptance had gone viral, now they were met with eye-roll emojis and side-by-side comparisons to influencers accused of performative activism. Authenticity had become the new luxury, and Meghan was no longer its ambassador. Through all of it, one symbol continued to haunt every discussion: the tunnel. The Paris Drive, once dismissed as coincidence, now stood as metaphor. It represented the cycle of repetition that Meghan could not escape, following the path of Diana, not out of homage, but out of inevitability. Paris had exposed not only a misstep, but a pattern. The pursuit of image had replaced the pursuit of substance, and the cost was credibility. By the end of that week, the global media no longer debated what Meghan wore or said. They debated whether her public identity had reached its natural end. Paris had been both a stage and a mirror, and what it reflected was uncomfortable: a figure once hailed as transformative, now trapped within the spectacle she created. The closing question lingered in every analysis and every post: can a public figure built on narrative survive when the narrative itself collapses? In the quiet that followed the noise of Paris, the answer seemed painfully clear. When the lights of Paris dimmed and the final runway emptied, what remained was not glamour, but a kind of cinematic stillness. Meghan Markle had come seeking validation, but she left with reflection. The city that was supposed to mark her rebirth as a global icon instead became the stage for a reckoning. Paris, eternal in its elegance, had shown her something few public figures ever confront so starkly: the cost of overexposure. After the spectacle report suggested, her team scrambled to repair the narrative. PR consultants were briefed, damage control memos drafted, and sympathetic journalists contacted. But the machinery that once magnified her every move was now indifferent. Headlines that once read like coronations were replaced with cautious analysis. Even publications historically favorable to her tone shifted toward objectivity. Meghan's Paris gamble backfires, read one headline in The Guardian. The choice of words gamble spoke volumes. In the following weeks, her silence was telling. Absent were the glamorous paparazzi walks, the curated podcasts, the viral humanitarian speeches. For the first time in years, the Duchess appeared adrift. Her attempts to control the narrative through self-produced media had backfired. The more she tried to reclaim control, the more audiences questioned the motive behind every gesture. The mystique that once shielded her had eroded. What remained was exposure without empathy. Within entertainment circles, whispers grew louder about what Paris had signaled for the long term. Deals once rumored with major streaming networks went quiet. Fashion partnerships, often the currency of global influence, failed to materialize. Analysts compared her trajectory to that of fallen influencers, personal brands that once promised transformation but collapsed under the weight of contradiction. The Sussex effect, once a symbol of reinvention, now served as a cautionary tale of what happens when authenticity is treated as strategy. Yet amid this decline, there was also something profoundly human about her silence. For all the criticism, there was a sense of exhaustion, not just from Meghan, but from the public itself. The world had watched her rise, rebel, retreat, and reappear, all in less than a decade. Perhaps the fatigue was inevitable. In the end, the woman who claimed to be misunderstood had become overinterpreted, her every move dissected to the point of erasure. Paris had not destroyed Meghan Markle. It had merely revealed the distance between intention and perception, between image and identity. The city, like a mirror, had shown what the world had long suspected, that fame without humility becomes a prison. Every photograph from Fashion Week, every clip replayed online, captured the same quiet truth: power built on attention is fleeting. And yet, amid the ruin of reputation, questions remain. Could this silence mark a turning point rather than an end? Could reinvention still be possible if she abandons performance for sincerity? History has shown that public memory is short, and redemption, when paired with humility, can arrive unexpectedly. But Paris has also shown that credibility once lost is not easily reclaimed. For Prince Harry, watching from afar, the personal cost may be even deeper. Analysts speculated that the Paris backlash strained their image as a couple, his sincerity overshadowed by her symbolism. The drive through the Pont de l'Alma, the haunting comparisons to Diana, the hollow applause in the fashion halls, all of it converged into a single narrative, a family haunted by repetition. The Paris silence was more than rejection, it was reflection. It forced the world to ask uncomfortable questions about celebrity culture itself. What happens when empathy becomes currency, when tragedy becomes branding, and when authenticity becomes performance? Meghan's story, stripped of its glamour, became a lens through which the audience confronted its own complicity in building and dismantling modern icons. The outro of this saga is not a scandal, but a lesson. In an age of spectacle, even the most powerful images fade. What endures are truth, humility, and quiet integrity, the very qualities that Paris demanded but did not see. For Meghan Markle, this may yet be an awakening disguised as exile. For the world watching it is a reminder that silence, though cruel, can sometimes be the first step toward clarity. As the credits of Fashion Week rolled and the headlines moved on, one final question lingered in the collective consciousness: when a duchess loses the crowd, can she ever regain the story? The answer, like Paris itself, remains unresolved. The Paris episode of Meghan Markle's public journey unfolded as both fashion spectacle and cultural mirror, revealing the fragility of modern celebrity. What began as a calculated re-entry into elite society through the corridors of Balenciaga and the glow of runway cameras ended as a quiet collapse of credibility. The City of Light, known for crowning icons and exposing imposters, offered no applause, only reflection. The whispers that began with borrowed couture and awkward silence evolved into full-blown controversy when Meghan's car passed through the Pont tunnel, the very site of Princess Diana's death. For admirers, it was coincidence. For critics, it was performance. The resulting outrage reignited questions about authenticity, symbolism, and the ethics of fame. By evoking Diana's memory consciously or not, Meghan had crossed into territory too sacred for artifice. The deeper irony emerged when observers recalled her long denunciation of the press, contrasted with her partnerships with media giants like CBS, the same network that once capitalized on Diana's final moments. Paris illuminated this hypocrisy. The woman who condemned exploitation had built her empire on it, transforming confession into commerce and tragedy into spectacle. As the days unfolded, the fashion world delivered its own verdict: exclusion. From the front rows of couture shows to digital timelines flooded with memes, Meghan's image deteriorated from polished power to public parody. The silence surrounding her in Paris was not indifference, it was rejection disguised as restraint. For the Duchess, who once symbolized defiance, the absence of applause was devastating. Yet beyond the gossip and memes, the Paris fallout carried a universal lesson. It exposed how modern culture consumes its icons, mistaking exposure for influence, performance for authenticity. Meghan's story became a reflection of the larger machinery of fame, how quickly admiration can decay into irony, and how silence can be more damning than scandal. In the aftermath, what remains is not destruction, but possibility. If silence is indeed a teacher, Paris offered its lesson: plainly, image fades, truth endures. Whether Meghan Markle learns from that truth or repeats the same performance elsewhere will determine whether her next chapter is redemption or